When he tells us to do something, when he leads us to do something, we got to do it. So many times, I go back to that time on the deck. I'm sure you guys have heard the analogy that the ladder to success. And you don't want to get to the top of that ladder and find out it was leaning against the wrong wall. And that's what happened to me on that deck. It didn't happen on that deck, but through that whole process of the stewardship campaign and getting me into the Bible, I realized my ladder was leaning on the wrong wall, and I had to climb down. So a lot of that process that God was taking me through was backing down the ladder and starting to climb the ladder of the right wall.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Pay It Forward podcast. I am one of your hosts, Austin Siewert, along with my co-host, Keegan Walls. And today we have the pleasure of meeting with Doug Fearing. Doug is the co-founder and president of Fearing's Audio, Video, and Security, based out of Madison, but serves the upper Midwest and Madison, Milwaukee area. They serve over 4,000 customers in the audio, video, and security industry. Been doing it for over 25 years now. I met Doug actually through Leading with Power. He came and spoke to our group there and was able to hear his testimony and story, and thought that it would be a powerful story for our audience to hear as well. So thank you for being here with us today, Doug.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit more about Fearing's for people that don't know.
Well, we're an AV and security systems contractor for the commercial and industrial marketplace. We don't do residential. So, our clients range from manufacturing to corporate to government, healthcare, and some churches, and so anything from conference rooms to paging systems for plants to any kind of security, video surveillance, access control, visitor management, gunshot detection, a mass notification. And so anything that has to do with really AV in those marketplaces. Some of our biggest clients are like Kalahari Resorts and Alliant Energy, and just we've got some pretty big name clients that we do business with that we're very grateful for.
Very cool. So do you guys, for bigger companies like that, I would assume they have an in-house staff too. Are you working alongside their in-house staff, or are they basically subbing that out to you guys?
Well, we're usually working with IT staff. Facility managers and IT staff are the main people we interface with. It seems like IT has been, because so much, I know one of your questions was how's business shifted? Well, everything is now running on a network. And so, and they're usually the people tasked in the larger corporations with finding the technology to solve their problems in the specific areas that they have problems. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So how does somebody get into this industry? What's the origin story? How did you guys get started?
Well, you have to have a passion for technology. I got into this business because I just kind of evolved. My grandpa started Fearing's TV and Appliance in Reedsburg, Wisconsin in 1953. And as his sons came out of the military, they were going into the family business, of which my dad was one. And when I was a senior in high school, he told me that you're going to go to DeVry Institute of Technology, where I went to, and learn how to fix TVs, and you're going to be my retirement plan. And that never panned out. My dad died at a very early age. I ended up in Portage working for another TV and appliance retailer, fixing TVs and putting up antennas. But I'm a always be learning kind of guy. And I was always learning about the next biggest thing. And that just kept evolving into bigger projects. And then it ended up, I was at the right place at the right time when Wisconsin Dells started to open up, and they've always been known for the boat trips and the ducks and that kind of thing. There was no such thing back in the 90s of water parks. And I was fixing their TVs, and as they started to grow and expand, they started asking me, can you do this and can you do that? And I just really grew up learning as they were building, and whatever they needed next, I would study it, learn it. And so anybody who's got a passion for technology and is a learner, it's a great industry for that. We do some really cool projects. And so, if you're in high school or you're going to go into technical college and you start in IT or any place in the technology field, this is a great industry to evolve into.
And it totally has evolved from when you started fixing TVs. Do they even fix TVs anymore? I think they sell them so cheap you probably throw it away and just buy a new one. Tell us like what that evolution has been like from when you started to the technology industry now.
Well, when I started, there was still tubes in TVs. So, and they were on their way out by then. Solid state was the new thing, but still picture tubes and LED screens and LCD screens were never a thing when I first started. So, and TVs were expensive, so you fixed them. And they're still getting fixed today, but it's usually in the larger scale, the 70-inch and plus. Everything else below that's kind of so inexpensive that people don't bother getting them fixed. But the big TVs are still getting fixed. We don't fix them here. We farm out.
Yeah. How are you able to stay like? There's been so much that has changed over the past 25 years. How do you kind of stay ahead of the curve, or what resources or what do you do to stay ahead of the curve as far as technology advancement?
Well, in my early days, I was just a reader of trade publications, and they were always sharing the latest and greatest. And so I would just read. I would just devour the trade mags when they first came out. In fact, when Kalahari built their first convention center, and we were brought in, we've been with Kalahari since the very beginning. And when we were brought in to propose and install the AV for the convention center, I literally modeled it after a project I'd read about in one of the trade publications. And then there's trade associations, and nowadays I'm not involved in the sales and installation aspect of what we do anymore. I'm strictly on the business side of things. But so we have engineers that are doing what I used to do. And we also have vendors that are we buy from, and they're always bringing the new latest and greatest technology in. And interestingly enough, some of our biggest transitions in new technology came from our customers. Kalahari in specific is their IT teams were always so sharp that they were always scouring the new technologies and bringing it to us. And then we'd figure out, can we sell that and install it? And it doesn't make sense. And if it did, we did. And so yeah, trade pubs, trade associations, vendors, and customers are the way we stay on top of things.
Awesome. And you mentioned earlier, you said you're doing some really cool projects right now. You have some cool things going on. What are some of those things?
Well, like Myron Construction up in Green Bay, which has offices all over the Midwest, they just updated all the technology in their headquarters, and we put in a bunch of video walls in there. It used to be, if you wanted a large screen, you had to go with a projector and a drop-down screen. And nowadays, video walls are replacing that. They're coming down in price and making it more affordable, and it just so much better. And then right now, our guys are in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, doing a big, huge 32-foot by 9-foot video wall for a client of ours. And then of course the stuff that they display on that is, anything from conferencing solutions to presentation systems and just some really video walls are probably the coolest thing that we're doing right now because they display such beautiful imagery on such large formats and then conferencing technology continues to get better and the control systems we use to operate our systems are getting much more easier to design and much more affordable. So if you've got a complex system to operate, you can simplify it all with a touch screen and make it, one button operation, that kind of thing. So, and then there's some security projects that are huge that we're doing with cameras and surveillance and access control. So
Well, there you go. That's what we need right here. See, we just need a big video. So you need to hook us up, take us to the next level. We need a giant video screen. Get rid of these bad boys and bring in Fearings, and now we'll be. Oh my gosh! You see that podcast? They got a video wall. Then we'll really make it.
You know how to get a hold of me now.
Yep. I think we might need to add a couple more sponsors before we invest in the video.
Well, he said they were coming in down in price, right? Couple hundred bucks.
No, not that.
Oh yeah. All right, we might be out.
But maybe
great.
what we do is we partner with you on that, and you got to just show the Fearings logo behind you the entire time.
That is perfectly reasonable.
If you want, we can make the whole building a video wall saying Fearings. If you want to partner on that, we will be the Fearings podcast. I don't care. We'll change it all. Let's scrap it.
Well, maybe we need to talk.
That is funny. Doug, I what you said stood out to me as far as a lot of your innovation came from your customers, and I think that can be applied to any business of listening to your customer and putting the needs of your customer first. And it's one thing to I just had a conversation with my brother, who's a real estate agent, who's doing a really big listing right now, and he envisions one thing in his head of how this should go and like what he wants to do and staging, but the client may actually have different goals, right? They may just want it done quickly and painlessly, and so listening to your client and developing your service or product based off of their needs, not necessarily like you guys could do some awesome stuff with technology, probably that would be super cool and get your juices flowing, but if it doesn't apply to your customer, it doesn't matter.
Right. Yep.
So that really stood out to me, and I think that can be applied to anybody's business. So, tell us more about your wife, Lois. I know you guys kind of have built this together. She works alongside of you. How has your marriage influenced your business, either professionally or personally?
Well, she's, my partner. We're 50-50 in the company, although she is now, we're getting her to the point where she's semi-retired. And so she's working 2 days a week, but she's I'm a visionary, and visionaries, they can kind of go way off in the distance, and she helps reel me back in. She's the finance person of the company, or has been, and the day-to-day bookkeeping is now, we've hired somebody to get her out of that, but she still keeps her eye on the books. And so she's like my alter ego. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And we're best friends. So, we can talk frankly and not hurt each other's feelings. And yeah.
What's some advice to people that are working with their spouse? Like, what are some things that they should be aware of or do? Just tell us more about like that dynamic for other people.
Well, our gifting complements each other. It's not in conflict. So that would be the one thing I would want to make. I would give advice to people. Number one, you want to be friends. If your relationship should be one that is not just husband and wife, but friends, so that you can get along in the tough times. and her gifting. So I mentioned I'm a visionary. She is very much a detail person, and we've before we started the business, we worked hand in hand in volunteer organizations. Like we were both involved in the JCs, which is now called the Junior Chamber of Commerce, which is the young person's version of Rotary or Alliance Club, Kiwanis. And we partnered together in that, complemented it. And eventually, I ended up state president of the Wisconsin JCs in 1990-91. And she was right there with me. It never would have happened without her. And so you need to know that you can work together, that you can be friends, and that your gifting complements, not conflicts. If your gifting between the two of you is identical, I don't know if it's going to work. So knowing your gifting then is very important. So
Yeah, and I think that applies to any partnership, right? A lot of people want to get in business with a friend, but if you guys are both have the same skill set and you don't complement each other, you're just gonna kind of be head to head the whole time, and it's just not clear roles or expectations. And so I think that's important with any partnership, is your roles do have to complement.
That's how it's been here. I don't have any skill set, so we don't. There's no conflict too much. So, just kidding. Sorry, bad joke.
No, that yeah. So
well, there's
Doug, I know
many
you.
days I think I don't have any skill sets.
Austin can attest, though.
I do not have skill set on anything that is in this room. I can have a conversation with somebody, and I enjoy doing it. But I asked Keegan before this, how can I help get set up? He was running late. He said, "Be quiet and do nothing." So that's how I can best help. And that's fine by me. So, Doug, I know you're pretty open about kind of your faith journey, and you talked about that at Leading with Power. Like, what point in your business career did your faith kind of become personal and transformative in your life and in your business?
Well, we started the business in 97, and it was this fall of 2005 where life really started to change. My wife and I were both raised in the church. She, a Missouri Synod Lutheran, and I was a United Methodist. We were both baptized at infancy. We both were confirmed in our churches. When we got married, she came with me to the Methodist church. And, but I never had a relationship with Jesus. And I didn't really even understand that. They didn't really talk too much about relationship with Jesus, knowing him personally, that I can remember in our church. Now, it could just be that I wasn't paying much attention. But anyway, my wife and I were both active in the church. In 2005, I was serving on the administrative council. She was active doing other things. And it was also the stage of our life where we had reached the pinnacle of our success at that stage of the game. And obviously we moved on, but at that stage of the game, we were flying high, and we were looking to buy a lake home, and we had an accepted offer on a lake home. And I'm standing on the deck of this lake home. We hadn't been able to purchase it yet because it was contingent on the sale of our home. And I'm looking out, it's about 40, 50 feet above the water. And I'm looking out over the water on this deck while the guy is doing the home inspection. And all of a sudden, I get this sinking feeling. And that's just exactly what it was, a sinking feeling. I am now 49 years old, and I've virtually achieved all the dreams I'd ever set out to achieve. You know, a successful business. Now I'd always wanted a home on the lake because I grew up boating and skiing and recreational boating mostly. And my wife and I are high school sweethearts, so she was always boating with me. And so this was like a dream come true. And I'm standing out on that deck, and I get this sinking feeling. And I all my dreams have come true. And I was an achiever. And like, now what do I set my achievement towards? And it was at that same point in time where our church had asked Lois and I, again, we were a team, and they asked us if we would co-chair a stewardship campaign for our church. And we said, sure, yeah. And little did I know that that was going to be the opening that God was going to use to get a hold of me. But so I had this sinking feeling on one hand, and then now I'm leading a stewardship campaign. And at the time, the Methodist Church stewardship campaigns were about a month long, and so you kind of build up momentum to Pledge Sunday. And in amongst there, the stewardship chair was supposed to give a message on stewardship, and I'd always hated what the past stewardship chairs does. It was always about the numbers. And I just hated that. And so I'd made up my mind that I was going to find out what Jesus had to say about stewardship. And I'd been in the Bible once before in my life. My wife had bought me one Father's Day, a life application Bible, and I vowed to read it. And I started at Genesis and I ended up in Leviticus, and I threw up my hands and said, this is too tough. And I gave up on that. And so I went to the internet to search about stewardship and Jesus, and I ended up on this story of the rich young fool, or rich young ruler, or rich young man, whatever. Different Bibles have different descriptions of it, but that's the guy who said, Jesus, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And one thing led to another, and Jesus told him to sell everything he owns, give it to the poor, and come follow me. And the man went away very sorrowful. Now, some translations say because he was very wealthy, but the translation I was working out of it said he had great possessions. And that just kind of like hit me like a ton of bricks, because now I'm at the pinnacle of my success at that point in my life. I'm about ready to buy a lake home. It was going to be my prized possession. And I'm convicted. And that one thing led to another. I stayed in the scriptures and had to figure, I knew I wasn't right with God at that point in time. So here I am, 49 years old, grew up in the church, and all of a sudden I am realizing that I am not right with God. And so when the stewardship campaign was over, I went back to Matthew 1 and I started reading through the scriptures, and I actually surrendered the house back to the Lord and said, it's contingent on the sale of our home. And so I surrendered it back. I said, Lord, if you don't want us to have this home, you can make the deal go through by just, delaying the purchase of our home till they sell it to somebody else. And after I surrendered that back to him, all of a sudden he opened up the door for us to get it without our house even being sold. The owner of the home that we were buying, it was a second home for them and a lot more expensive than our little ranch home that we were going to be leaving. And he wanted to just, if he had to sit on a home, he wanted to sit on our cheaper home and get the money out of his home. And I'm like, that's not what I expected. So we ended up in the home, and it was short. And I just kept studying the Word. And my life application Bibles just got awesome study notes in, and they call it life application because the notes in there not only tell you what the scripture means, but also says this is how you apply it to your life. And it was shortly after we moved into that home. I didn't write the date down, but I know we moved into the home on January 26th, and my birthday was on February 27th. And somewhere in there, because I know I was still 49 years old, that sticks out in my head, I finally just got to Romans 4, verses 4 and 5, where it says to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as payment due. But to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the wicked, his faith will be counted as righteousness. And it was in reading that, I put down my Bible, closed it up, and I remember exactly my words. Okay, God, I get it now. I'll do it your way. And nothing happened right at that moment. But in the next coming weeks, my life just started to change. And I actually, they talk about Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. And the preachers preach it and the teachers teach it. But I don't think a whole lot of people that actually think they're Christian have actually experienced the love of God in their life. And I started experiencing it. And I was like, wow. And so everything started to change at that point. And my wife started to notice it, and I started to become a better husband. I started to become a better father. I did not start becoming a better boss for several years, because God was working on my husbandship and fathership and my character. He had a lot of work to do there, but I started walking with Jesus, and I've been walking with him ever since, and I never really looked back.
That's incredible. So what in your experience, because there are a lot of people, like you said, in that same boat of they grow up, they do the thing, they think because they're doing the thing, I'm good. And then the reality is it's not just about doing work and going up and showing up to an event, but it's about having your life change, being born again and experiencing the love of God. So beyond your testimony, like what advice would you give to people who are maybe stuck in that place, or maybe starting to have that same realization of, look, I've been doing all the right stuff, or I have the success, but there's a sinking feeling. There's just something missing, and I know I just can't. I don't know what to do. Next steps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What would you say to that person? The Doug Fearing before
Well, I actually wrote a book
and
about
having
it.
it. Well, there you go. Come on, look at that.
So buy the
promise I
book.
didn't. I promise I didn't know that, but that's a great setup. You're welcome.
Yeah, so mm, I guess you said it in your statement about being born again. So they never talked about being born again in my church. Now, the Methodist Church was at its early stages was founded by John Wesley, not the church, but the Methodist movement. And John Wesley believed that the two most important doctrines of the church are the new birth, or being born again, and justification. He's actually got a sermon on it called The New Birth. And I'm like, after I'm starting to understand all this, I'm saying, why wasn't this ever talked about in my church? They never preached on the new birth. They never preached on being born again. And in fact, in my research of studying for the message I was to give, I started learning about being born again. And I'm like, where was all this stuff? So my first question to anybody that's lingering, or just kind of like where I was, is that I would just plain ask them in their face, are you born again? And if they ask, well, how do you know? Then I'd say, well, there's probably a pretty good chance if you ask that question, you don't know. And so you need to get about the business of asking God, what must I do to be born again? And he'll lead you. If you ask that question earnestly, he's going to lead you. And so, because God is hungry for hungry hearts. And just asking the question, are you born again? And Father, in fact, I remember once hearing a story by Billy Graham. He was in Poland doing a big crusade, and there was a Polish priest there who was helping him with the crusade. And I'm not saying this perfectly, so it's more of a big paraphrase, but the Polish priest was telling Billy about his story and how he had been, ordained in the church. He was a priest, and he was in America. I don't remember what city. I think it was Chicago. And he had been there. He had been writing on theology and all this stuff. And he was sitting on a bus coming back from the conference center to his hotel room. And he's sitting on the mass transit bus. And this little old lady starts poking him in the back. He had his collar on, and she knew that he was religious. And he turned around and he said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Are you born again?" And he kind of looks at her and said, "Ma'am, I'm a priest." And she said, "That ain't what I asked you. I asked you, are you born again?" And it convicted him. And he got back to his hotel room and he got down on his knees and he asked God, I don't know if it's that question, but it was, "Lord, there's something missing. And what is it?" And right there in his hotel room, he got saved. So this guy's a priest and he's preaching it and he's not saved. And because of a little old lady on a bus who got it, he got it. And so I don't mean to sidetrack too much.
No, I love that. And so for you then, after being born again, you being saved, I know you said it took a little bit for you to make the adjustment in terms of being a boss in your business, but in terms of like your lens and your perspective on things now, how did it change? Because you had the built up success prior. Now all of a sudden you get saved. I imagine that rocks your world a bit. So like talk about that a little bit, the tension and the perspective of I need to do this differently and how it kind of changed you personally within your business and then your business overall.
Well, for many years, it didn't change me in my business. In fact, it might have actually hurt a little bit because after I got saved, it was a pretty radical transformation, and I thought God was calling me into the ministry. And so the first thing I started thinking was that I gotta prepare this business for sale so I can do what God's calling me to next. Well, obviously that wasn't what He wasn't calling me to, because I'm still here. So for several years, I was trying to prepare the company for sale, kind of behind the scenes. I didn't tell anybody except Lois. But he really started to work on my husbandship. We don't have time to go into that story, but if anybody buys my book, you'll know that, you'll find out that my marriage had been for quite some time on life support, and I didn't even know it. Both my wife and I had committed adultery in the past, unbeknownst to the other. And it was kept a secret. And by divine providence, it was kept a secret because there's no way it shouldn't have been found out. And then, so God started to take us through this reconciliation process, bringing all that into the light and taking us through the forgiveness process. We actually confessing Lois. I confessed my adultery to Lois in 2007. She did to me in 2010. Our faith weren't strong enough for me to handle what she was going to tell me in 2010 until 2010, because it was a doozy. And then, so he's taken us through all that process, and the business was kind of going day to day. I was coming to work, but so much of my life was about God fixing my character and dealing with our past. And my oldest daughter had been sexually molested during her high school years, unbeknownst to us, and we didn't find out about it until she crashed and burned out of college. And he started taking us through the process of healing her. And yeah, we've had an amazing journey. And he's been transforming it all. And so it's really just been in the last 5 years that God has had me focusing on becoming a better boss and better leader. And so that sounds like contradiction, but there's just so many other things that needed to be fixed in my life that we're just now getting to the place where I could say that I'm a good leader of our company.
And I'm sure though, I know that's you, but I bet people around you and your employees and stuff would say, yeah, maybe like in your mind, you're not focusing on being a better boss, but there's no way to not be a better boss, right? When you're being the salt of the earth, when you're being the light to the world, now that you have the Holy Spirit and Jesus working on your character, the spill off and the spillage is just better anyway. So I'm
Yep.
sure if you asked people, you were a better boss and doing a lot better than what you even think. So
I would say that I am my harshest critic. I hold myself to a pretty high standard, higher than even God holds me. And he's actually been working on that in me. I was just listening to a Susie Larson podcast, and I don't remember who her guest was, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with Susie Larson at all, but she's on Christian radio and really powerful show. Anyway, they were talking about how Christians are not meant to be achievers. We're meant to be receivers. And I just thought, wow, how many times are we out there trying to do things for God that he already wants to give us? And I'm really trying to settle into that. And not to say that we're not supposed to, when he tells us to do something, when he leads us to do something, we got to do it. so many times, I go back to that time on the deck. I'm sure you guys have heard the analogy that the ladder to success. And you don't want to get to the top of that ladder and find out it was leaning against the wrong wall. And that's what happened to me on that deck. It didn't happen on that deck, but through that whole process of the stewardship campaign and getting me into the Bible, I realized my ladder was leaning on the wrong wall, and I had to climb down. So a lot of that process that God was taking me through was backing down the ladder and starting to climb the ladder of the right wall.
That's awesome.
Doug, what would you say to somebody who, I mean, yourself at that moment at the pinnacle of success, of worldly success, and reading the story of the rich man that God said to basically sell everything? I'm guessing there's some people that are hesitant, like, okay, do I have to go into ministry now? I'm gonna surrender my life and be born again, like, but I don't want to lose my business, or I don't want, like, you know what I mean? So what do you say to that person that's maybe hesitant, that they're gonna have to now become a priest if they surrender their life?
So that is a great question, because one of the things that took me a while to get over was I was afraid, two things. I was afraid that God was going to call me to be a missionary in Africa. I had heard the stories of the disciples. Jesus comes along and says, "Follow me," and they drop everything and take off and follow Jesus. Well, it isn't until the book of John you understand that Jesus did have a relationship with them prior to them just dropping everything and going. But I was convinced that the minute I said yes to Jesus, he was gonna have in no time he was gonna have my bags packed to a missionary in Africa. The other thing was that my sister had come to faith in Christ several years before I did, saving faith, and we all thought she was nuts. And so, and her husband did not like it at all, and made her a kind of an ultimatum that if you don't quit going to church and I'm going to leave, and they split up. And she held to her faith, and he didn't want anything to do with it. So I had those two things to overcome. Jesus says I think it's Luke 14 that Jesus talks about counting the cost. Well, so part of that whole process for me was counting the cost. Did I really want to do this? But I understood that the alternative was hell when I died. And I came to this point where I had made the decision that I would rather be a missionary in Africa with God than spend my life doing what I was doing without him and spend eternity in hell. So that was a critical faith moment that I had to step from one place to another. And so when I say it was radical, that moment, it didn't seem radical, but after I reflect back, it was pretty radical. And he did not move me. My bags weren't packed. My wife didn't leave me. And I'm still in the business. Chances are where he has you at the time you get saved is where you're supposed to be. Providence has put you there. Now, it may evolve over time that he moves you out, but at that point in time, you won't care because you'll be walking with him. He'll give you the faith you need to do whatever needs to be done. It's by grace you are saved through faith, and grace comes before faith. And he was giving me the grace that poured into me the faith I needed, and I'm still here as a business owner. So, but you do have to count the cost. And boy, I sure would hate for you to, because of your cowardness of the future, to spend eternity in hell because you couldn't make that decision. It's kind of blunt, but it's the truth.
Yeah, it certainly is, and it certainly it's pretty black and white when you say it that way, right? It's not a black and white journey, but when you really think about it, it is it is a black and white decision that you need to make. Tell us more. You talked about how the past 5 years have been transformative in your business as a leader. What are some of those things that you've been working on that you've noticed that have changed?
Well, first, my desire to actually want to be a great leader. The Lord has shown me some things in the future after I retire, but He's got to move me out of here. And I'm not going to be in achieving mode. I want to be in receiving mode. So I'm waiting on the Lord for Him to make that happen. But it does occasionally get you impatient because you see things in the future and you want to get through there. So I have struggled with that. And I'm just in the last few years getting peace with it. But I know that my part of my purpose is to glorify God. And so I've come to this place where I need to become a better leader so that I better glorify God. Jesus said in John 17:3 that I have glorified you, Father, by completing the work that you gave me to do. So I always think when people talk about purpose, I always want to be clear that all of our purpose, every person on earth's purpose, is to glorify God. The Greater Westminster Catechism says that, asks the question, the very first question of the Catechism says, what is the chief end of man? And then it answers that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And so Jesus said, I have completed. So there's purpose, which is to glorify God. And then there's by completing the work you gave me to do. And so that's what I call calling. So my purpose is to glorify God. And part of that is the leadership in this company. I want to become a better leader because I want to better glorify God. My motivation is not because I want to be a great leader for my own glory. I understand that becoming a better leader is about glorifying Him.
Have you seen changes in your team and in your company since working through these things?
Yes. Now, I would have to say that, one of my desires is that many of our employees there would be an awakening in my company, and I have not seen that yet. But I do believe it will come. But just within my own executive team, and he's had to change me. I remember it wasn't all that, just maybe 2 years ago so I was always one of these people who believed that conflict was good because you could get things out in the open. I was never a person to want to pussyfoot around and just let's get to it. And so I was always very aggressive at mixing it up, even with my team. And I was not making progress. And then I went to my pastor and he turned me on to this book, Crucial Conversations. And I started listening to the audiobook, and I'm listening, and this is some really good stuff, but man, it's going to take me years to get polished in all of this stuff. And I think I was 67 years old at that. I'm 69 right now. I just turned 69. So I was 66, 67. I don't have time to spend years learning how to have crucial conversations. Can't you just simplify this and help me through scripture get through this? And he just almost immediately gave me, I think it's Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, and a harsh word stirs up anger. And he not only did he give me that verse, but he downloaded into me a new peace where I was actually able almost instantly to start walking in that. And I've had some relationships even within my leadership team that were always dicey because I was this let's get to it kind of guy and mix it up and get to the answers fast, and it wasn't working. And our leadership team has become a lot more cohesive, but he had to change me, not them.
How, in regards to your team and your leadership team and the team, your team of employees, how do you instill that purpose in them that they're coming and what they're finding the same fulfillment or calling that you are through your work and your leadership, that they're not just coming in, that's not just a paycheck for them, that they're clocking in, clocking out, collecting a paycheck. Like, how do you instill that calling or purpose in your team?
Well, we have to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. Um, it's like your children, and I don't mean that condescendingly, but that's just the way we are. We need to hear the message repeated, and then whoever is saying the message needs to be living the message, so it's believable. And so, in 2019, we started operating the company under the Entrepreneur Operating System, EOS. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. And so instead of it being purely top down, Doug Fearing on the top, everybody else below, I put together an executive committee of my top guys, top people, I should say. And we started operating as a committee and started operating under the Entrepreneur Operating System. And that's allowed for a lot more dialogue. It isn't Doug Fearing making all the decisions or somebody having to come into my office and say, I got an idea, or, we meet weekly for an hour and a half every week. And then quarterly, we do quarterly retreats. And so we have built through the EOS process, getting started, we built our core values together. We had a vision statement and a mission statement, but we perfected them together. So it's all been done together as far as the leadership team goes. It's not Doug Fearing dictating, and it's not Doug Fearing's vision alone or mission alone or core values alone. It's ours together. That makes it easier for them to take it down to their people down below. And I can't say that we're not perfectly, everything's not running like a machine yet, but we are so much farther away than we were 10 years ago. And 5 years from now, whether I'm here or not, we'll be better than we are right now. So we're just continuous. And one of our core values is always improving.
Can you talk more about I'm a huge fan of EOS and have known about it for a while. Like, talk about the importance of having kind of that management structure to your business to allow you to have those conversations, to allow you to, I just feel like when you have that structure, it's easier. Those conversations just kind of come more naturally versus random meetings at random times and random accountability and who reports to who, and like talk about the importance of having that structure in your business.
It's crucial. It's, a discipline. And, with EOS, you meet weekly, generally an hour and a half. And then you have a set agenda. And then you have that little section in there called IDS, which stands for Issues, Discuss, Solve. And so any issue that you're dealing with as a leadership team is not getting kicked down the can. You're dealing with it weekly. It's in front of you weekly. And sometimes you don't always solve things in that week. You carry them on because there's information that's got to be collected and stuff. And then, of course, they've got the to-dos, which are to be done, within a week to 2 weeks. And then there's the rocks, which are to be done quarterly. But so that discipline just helps us stay on track of the things that need to be done. Issues are brought to the table quickly. They're solved generally fairly quickly. And so I just would highly recommend, except for like sole entrepreneurs and stuff like that, if you have a group of people underneath you that are crucial to the future of your company, get with the EOS system and start to play it out, because it was in that they make you establish your core values. They lead you through the process of establishing them, and your mission and your big, hairy, audacious goal and everything. So it really just helps set the stage for building a better company. And then you as a leader, of course, going back to me, even it was just 2 years ago that I had this revelation of Proverbs 15:1. You've got to be willing to change. But if you keep that notion in the back of your head that my responsibility is to glorify God with my life, not all by myself, but with him, going back to not achieving, but receiving, you're a partnership. But my purpose is to glorify him. And then I do that by completing the works you gave me to do. And so those works you actually find out through him too. What do you need me to do, Lord? That requires this communication between you and the Lord on a regular basis.
Doug, I mean, you've been in business for decades, nearing the end of your career, and have gained a ton of wisdom through your faith journey, through your business journey, through life. If you had to pick one piece of wisdom to share with the next generation of leaders, what would that be?
Well, it would go right back to that day on the deck. Make sure your ladder is on the right wall. And I would want to, the first question I would ask somebody if they came to me, it's hard for me to go out and just say, "Are you born again?" But if they came to me and we wanted to start a conversation, that'd be the first question I would ask is, "Are you born again?" We need to start there. And I can disciple you, and the business we can do it all together, but let's get you on the right foundation first.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Doug, we appreciate you being here. I think your story is a testament to, when you were saved, the day on the deck. Since then, it's not like it was a radical change and now you're perfect. And I
No.
think that's what's amazing to see, and it's inspiring that like you're so in tune with your relationship with Jesus, and he's continually working in your life since that time and today until the day you die. And I think that's important for people to see and hear, that it is certainly not a quick fix to your problems, that you still have to do the work and you still have to work through those things with him. But it's an ongoing relationship, and everything you describe is a relationship, and he's picking apart certain areas of your life that you can work on and become more like him and more in his image. So ton of wisdom. Thank you for being here with us today, and I hope that your story is able to inspire that next generation of people who maybe haven't made that decision yet, or are at the beginning of their leadership careers.
Well, if anybody wants to know more about my book, I'm kind of a shameless plug. Just go to douglasfearing.com.
Okay.
Yeah. No,
I've got an author's website, and it'll point you there and kind of give you some background, tell you a little bit about my family and stuff too. So
perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure to link that. All that will be linked below, so they can go get your book, visit your website, and yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for also just being vulnerable and open and honest, and yeah, it was wonderful to meet you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, really, and I really enjoyed speaking at Leading with Power. I have to say that I hadn't actually public spoke for a little bit coming up to your event, so I was worshiping all the way up from Portage to La Crosse, and by the time I got there, I just felt like the Holy Spirit was all over me, and that trip up there was worth the speaking.
That's awesome. Yeah, we really enjoyed having you. It was great. So
thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of the Pay It Forward podcast. And like we always say, we hope that you can find a way this week to pay it forward.